Well, our point is we've reached the place in our career, in our professional development, if you like, where we think there's a turning point. There is no case whatsoever for just simply meeting building regulations anymore. We think there's such good evidence that we can build homes that have almost no heating requirements at all. The only thermal heaters that it really required in most of these homes are for hot water, for washing up, bathing.
What about cooling? Because it's getting hotter as
well. Again, it doesn't really matter because they're all electric. They have heat pump systems. It's possible to make the heat pumps reversible so that your peak cooling loads correspond with peak solar insolation, which works incredibly well. So I've got no problem with installing cooling, providing it's run off solar.
What are Z standards?
Well, we've been studying or developing a building physics model for years. Originally, we started working with Chris Twin of Arup. We designed BedZ.
Basically, you looked at the building regulations. You're saying this is not.
We haven't followed the building regulations for. I'm not joking. We haven't even looked at them, other than statutory requirements for disabled access and so on and so forth, and fire. We haven't picked up the thermal section for 20 years.
So you think it's
irrelevant.
You think architecture set their own standards and not look to building regulations?
Yes. I mean, what industry just simply does the bare legal minimum and produces something that's any good?
So
I mean, I look at these architects in the magazines and the Architects Journal, and I see a wall 300 millimeters thick or 400 millimeters thick with 150 mil of insulation, and I just weep.
But aren't they being forced to do that by market pressures, by having to?
No, there's no case whatsoever. As I say, there's no case whatsoever. There's no economic case at all. There's every reason now to move towards what we call a zero heating specification, and that's what I wrote the book, the Z Life book. It's all in there.
What do you think?
What we decided to do was try and work out what the problems are. We've been trying to solve the same problems now for 20 years. We're now getting good at it. We think you can change the industry by understanding the problems and then going in and then achieving economies of scale with the supply chain. So that's why we're called Z Factory. We work with industry, with factories, with manufacturers to change the industry to create higher standards that deliver the following social benefits.
So do you think other architects could use your standards,
totally.
the Z standards?
Yeah, that's the whole plan. That's why I bothered to write a book. That's why we're sharing huge amounts of information. Always have done.
What is Z Life?
Well, Z Life basically just goes a little bit further in it, and it says, look, it's not just about the building fabric. It's about designing lifestyles and designing work styles. We have to now design how we live to really make a big difference. And that came from work we did at BedZ years ago, where we did footprint analysis, environmental footprint analysis of both BedZ and the surrounding neighbourhood. And we basically found that someone who lived in an environment like BedZ could reduce their environmental footprint by about a third of living in a conventional home and so on. But to make it really work, you have to look at lifestyle, you have to look at your transportation decisions, you have to look at how many flights you get, your diet, and so on and so forth.
So it's about the individual taking responsibility for.
Yeah. So a third is done by infrastructure, and then a third is done by you personally, and that gets you down to the. You basically we all have to reduce our environmental footprint, our resource consumption by 2/3. We're trying to persuade people to move across to electric transportation. If your house can run itself pretty well, we're getting to the point now where architecture can actually power transportation as well as running itself.
So it could power. So your house could create enough energy for it to run.
My house can get me to work.
In a car, if you charge it.
In a car, yeah. I mean, it's even easier when I actually got to work today on an electric bike, which we designed. But the point is now that if you look at how you spend scarce resources, you've got to integrate transport into architecture and master planning way more than it has been. And it completely changes the rules. So there's been a whole batch of vitriolic debate about car use, how you have to reduce car use to reduce carbon footprints. Well, actually, if the car is run by solar or wind, or indeed if the car has what's called V2G, vehicle to grid, it can actually store renewable energy and then inject it into the grid at times of peak demand. Actually, the car becomes not your enemy, it becomes your friend. Cars are one thing. Cars aren't the solution. Cars are actually very expensive as well. So, for example, I got here, we're developing these 1 kilowatt hour batteries, which are portable and charged off one solar panel. So we can put them in an electric bike. You can put one in the lawnmower. You can put one to power your Dyson. I can have one battery powering this room. And it only imports power off the grid when there isn't enough sun. And even then, in the middle of the night, when no one's using the grid. So you don't have to build any more power stations. So you don't have to build Hinkley Point. You don't have to invest, you don't have to bring in Russian gas. The whole thing starts to completely change the way you think about urban fabric, about master planning, about transport, about architecture. It's terribly important, this.
But what are these batteries made out of? Are they going to have to be made out of?
Well, at the moment they're made out of lithium iron phosphate, but that changes every 4 or 5 years. There's extremely good batteries coming through very quickly with different chemistries which are much more environmentally benign. There's even seawater batteries coming through. It's changing so quick.
What do you think about the resources and the fact that population increase and densities in cities needs to increase?
Well, I think it's that statement is highly challengeable.
Okay.
That statement is tired old stuff.
So you don't think we need to have denser cities?
I don't think the idea that you pile everybody into a city is necessarily the right answer. It can be, but it isn't. It isn't necessarily the right answer. Overcrowding, it isn't necessarily more energy efficient. It makes it more problematic to remove all the waste. As an urban metabolism, because you have to think of a city as a living object, it doesn't make a tremendous. There comes a point where the living object gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it actually can't be sustained by its host environment. And we're very close to that. So the resource footprint of London is the rest of the UK.
Yes.
So what happens to Manchester or Liverpool or York or Edinburgh or Bristol? What are they going to live off?
But if population...
They rely on us importing 70 to 80% of our nutritional requirements from overseas. Well, with climate change accelerating, it may not be possible to keep bringing in food from overseas because actually there isn't going to be so much food on the international market. So why would you concentrate all your population in a city? Actually, you need to do exactly the opposite. You need to repopulate the countryside, and you need to get a less fossil fuel intensive agricultural system working, which probably will use organic techniques and increase its labour. So it's the reversal of the agricultural revolution. So all these people advocating expanding cities are based on the fact that fossil fuel reserves are limitless and that you can afford to keep burning the stuff in perpetuity. They've done no work at all in actually working out how to sustain these increased density cities. And in fact, what's happening now is that rural repopulation is becoming more possible due to information technology, and land prices are way too high in London, for example. Way too high. House prices are way too high. People are moving out of cities because they just can't afford to follow the sheep.
So we shouldn't be densifying our cities, we should be spreading out within towns, making towns bigger and building in the countryside.
We've got to reduce our environmental footprint on our levels of resource consumption, and you can only increase cities if you increase the use of energy intensive mechanized agriculture, and I'm not sure that is a good plan. And I'm not sure people actually want it either.
So it's about feeding the city becomes a problem if it becomes so dense.
Yeah.
So the solution is to spread out, and then
the solution is to have more people, more population. You're going to need a lot more people basically starting to work the land if you want to stay alive as climate change accelerates.
So more of us are going to have to grow our own food.
We're going to have to participate in the growing of food, yeah. And that's starting. You're starting to see that. You're starting to see the kind of urban foraging movements. You're starting to see the smarter younger generation are starting to engage with this. They understand that they can't just walk into Waitrose or Tesco's and just keep buying food. It isn't going to keep coming.
So what if you're living on the 23rd floor in a flat in London?
Well, and people are, and luckily not too many people actually. And one of the good things about the British is they did the experiment into high-rise early, and they found that it was pretty inhumane place to bring up families. So it's not that it's wrong. It's just it's wrong for certain kinds of people.
So you don't believe in high-rise buildings and towers. You believe that we should be low-rise.
I think there's a case for them, but I don't think they're not the most rational answer to the question. I mean, we've done loads of studies. I can show them to you where you take virtually any high-rise exemplar and urban district, and then you work out the actual density by the time you've put in place all the access roads, servicing requirements, open space that has to be created in front of it or behind it because of the shadows, and so on and so forth. And I talk about residential now, not commercial.
Yeah.
And actually, it's all rubbish. You might as well have done a ground scraper and kept everything 4 to 8 stories high, and you'd have achieved exactly the same density with much higher quality of life.
What?
One of the things we're working on at the moment is we're developing a house kit where people can just literally take components made in a variety of different places and build their own house. Take couple of weeks off work and just build their own house. And that thinking, I think, is going to transform the building industry, because you just have to ask yourself, did I really want to pay hundreds of thousands of pounds for something which was junk when you could have had something that was very specifically tailored, met your exact requirements, and was better? And I think that's going to be a big change. And you're going to see that with everything. You see that with bicycles, electric bikes, motorcycles, cars. You don't need to buy a car from a car maker anymore. With the transition to electric vehicles, it's actually possible to buy all the components from specialist companies, and just a kit car will become a really easy thing to do. And that is exciting, because that's empowering.
So we could, so this was called your kit house, your zero carbon kit house.
Yeah. So
you could get components. You sell components, and people could put it together themselves.
Yeah. For example, we've got a. Let's just take the thing behind you. There's a plate glass solar panel which is glass made to fit a building grid. There's a set of extrusions that are run off that go that you could assemble that. That could be a facade. That could be a roof. It comes with insulation, so you can overclad an existing timber frame building, or a masonry building, or a cross-laminated timber building. And you start, there's a window that fits that module, there's a door that fits that module, there's different cladding options. You can start to demystify architecture.
So you've created a kind of a kit for people that they could put together to create their own.
It's an open system, yeah. And I do know a bit about that stuff. I worked a long time at Hopkins. I did 14 years there. I worked on the Patera systems. I've obviously followed the work of people like Rogers. But it's more they're so esoteric. Each time you hire one of these famous architects, they design a kit of parts to suit that particular building, which is kind of wrong. Actually, what's needed to get economies of scale, you've got to have an open system which can be used by anyone on many projects.
It should be more generic.
It's got to be, otherwise you don't get the economies of scale.
In your book, you argue that a lot of architects are giving cosmetic treatment to buildings and just working to the minimum standards.
Architects are really. I'm very critical of that, and I'm very concerned that you just see. Let's take the Olympic Village, where the architects were all given a frame grid, and all they could do was choose cladding materials. So it's just wallpaper. That is the end of architecture, and you go there and it's horrible. It looks like a sort of Stalinist.
So how do you think? What is the way out of that for architects?
Well, I think architects have to fight back. They have to be better. They have to understand what a real contemporary vernacular actually is. They have to. The real skill of an architect, I think, is to work with engineers, with industry, and actually produce beautiful, crafted, imaginative components. So architects have to get involved with the supply chain. They have to get their hands dirty. When they're reduced to just specifying someone else's cladding system, you've lost it. And I don't like. I look at the magazines and I just see form-based architecture, which is just an interesting shape, or an interesting texture, or an interesting graphic. If it's just come down to that, it's the end of architecture. Because why didn't you get an interior design lovey to go and do it? Why did you need all these clever, high-powered people with a deep understanding of how things work? You don't. You just need a graphics skill. So the evolution of a contemporary vernacular is terribly important. That's the thing that isn't discussed.
So what do you think we should be doing?
Well, we've got to add real value, and we've got to show how our skills can seriously help the well-being and welfare of the majority of people around us that we serve. I'd say that's not the case right now. I'd say the architecture profession has lost its way big time. I'm quite critical. I think we need to start a campaign for real architects, actually. Like the campaign for real ale, I think we need to do the campaign for real architects.
What does that mean?
Well, it's the difference between a pint of Eurofizz and something that actually is going to help, has flavour, local texture, produced by local labour, and actually solves some problems. And I don't see that's not a priority for the majority of architects. They're taught to be egotistical. They're interested in self-expression, artistic expression. They're not interested in solving too many problems that I can see.
It's about the architects becoming more think about solving problems rather than trying to.
Well, somebody's got to solve the problems. If you're not getting any political direction or ideas, and you've got an industry which is geared to delivering the legal minimum, and you've got a series of environmental problems which are accelerating, and you're getting resource depletion very fast, and you're getting climate change very fast, have you got a plan? Where's the plan coming from?
Don't know.
Well, that's it. You don't know. So someone's got to have a plan, or let's debate what the plan is. But if there's no plan, what's going to happen?
So you think architects should come together
and
create a plan for how we should all move forward?
Absolutely. We because we understand what we can do, we have a responsibility to communicate it, and we have a responsibility to create a direction of travel which won't lead us all into terrible problems going forward.
Is this political then? Is this a political thing if we come getting together and coming up with a big plan? It sounds like politics. Sounds like maybe there's the government.
I think it's more. I don't think it's political. Obviously, it's political if it's adopted or if it's communicated with the population. I think it's more. We're at this turning point where we know enough, we've made enough progress in all of these fields: energy efficiency, renewable energy integration, understanding social problems, understanding placemaking, understanding transportation implications, and understanding urban metabolisms. We've made enough progress. We are way better than we were. Okay, and if you're at this turning point and you can see how you could stop, how you could genuinely improve the situation that society is finding itself in, then you probably do have a moral responsibility to try and do something about it. And if you don't, you're continuing to be part of the problem, not part of the solution. So that's the turning point. So if you have a better plan, okay, this isn't saying I'm the only person with a plan, because that's not true.
Yeah.
But if you say you have a better plan and you can show through debate or research or exemplar, my goodness, that's terribly important, and that should be discussed, monitored, debated, and slowly the zeitgeist reforms around this information, and society progresses.
So you think all architects should have a plan? They should have of what they're doing, and to how they are going to contribute to the built environment. And if they don't have a plan, then they're just following the market forces. They're part of the problem.
Yes.
Okay, so everyone should have a plan which is geared towards helping to solve all these big problems that we have in the world: climate change, and
they should understand the implications of their actions, and it's constructive to debate what is the direction of travel, and we can solve really big problems. Like, for example, if you engage in a nuclear power program for the UK, what does that actually mean socially? It means that you've got a very high technology that has to be looked after for thousands of years. It's going to change the political form. It will impinge on personal freedoms. You have very toxic materials that need armed.
So you don't believe in?
But my point is. So you can just say you built a heritage exemplar town. Let's say you built Poundbury.
Okay.
Yeah, the Prince of Wales project. Say you built Poundbury, and say you had to build a nuclear power station called Hinkley Point to run Poundbury. And if it isn't Poundbury, it's Poundbury, Friends of Poundbury, okay? There's a whole raft of them. So you're basically saying that I'm going to export all the problems, or I'm going to export all my problems somewhere else. Now, the implications of that are massive. Number one, there's the degradation of the environment around Hinkley Point. Number two, there's the social framework that you need to, political framework that you need to make Hinkley Point run in case of terrorism, in case of all that stuff. Okay? And you've got a different society basically where some people, the elite, live in their chocolate box urban environment, and then you've got this incredibly degraded service environment which makes all that possible. And what I'm saying is that is utter bullshit. We got to solve our own problems wherever we're working. We can do that. We have all the skills, all the technology. There's no downside. It doesn't hurt anyone, and the social benefits are massive. Let's have the debate. Are we having it? No. So if I once sent one of my projects into the Architects Journal. We're doing some work on a conference centre at the Earth Centre in Doncaster. I sent it into the Architects Journal, and they said they didn't want to feature it because it was too ugly. So they said the aesthetic of my building was not appropriate to be published in the Architects Journal. So my point would be, who decides that? What grounds do they determine what is beautiful, what is not beautiful? What's the value system that came up with that judgment? And yeah.
So they said it was too ugly, but then what is you're saying what is beautiful, what is ugly, that is just based on that's taste, and that taste is
It's taste, it's values, it's direction of travel, it's vision. It's a famous high-tech architect came and walked around Bedshead and said, "I don't like all the mullions; they're too thick. They should have been aluminium or steel." Well, why do you think they're not aluminium or steel? Because of the embodied carbon. Does it matter? No. So that's an aesthetic applied from their realm to somebody else's value systems.
What do you think of things like, so if architects are working to things like BREEAM or LEED, and you say you've got BREEAM, excellent or outstanding building, is that a good way of judging how rigorous an architect has been?
Well, it's a start. It's a start, but these things are BREEAM's pretty well okay, I suspect. But don't forget, they have to make it not too hard to pass, otherwise no one enters. So there's a danger of the marketing feedback loop. And green building councils, all the people who caused the problems in the first place get together and set up a green building council. Well, how is that going to work? There's been an entire parallel green building movement in the UK for years and years and years, which have had no input whatsoever into the green building councils because they can't afford the 15 to 25 grand that you need to be part of the green building council, because who's got that, including me? So it's a bit of a joke, really. So the answer is, how do you have these debates? I mean, the BREEAM, I think, has got solid intentions. Their new home quality mark, which I have checked out, is pretty bloody good. They came up with a code for sustainable homes, which was going to be mandatory in 2016 and got pulled by the Volume House.
Code 6.
Code 6.
Yeah. That was good.
Oh yeah, that's superb. We're meeting Code 6 on all our projects now.
So why was it? Do you know why it was pulled?
It was pulled by the Volume House builders, pulled by pressure from Volume House builders, because they said it was too difficult to do. But they didn't try to do it. If you're trying to stop something being done, you can provide all sorts of evidence that shows that you can't. It's too difficult to meet the air tightness standards. It was too difficult to do the insulation. It was too expensive. It would have affected the price of housing. We're building Code 6 homes at the moment. 5-bedroom homes in Barking and Dagenham. They're costing about £250,000, and they're being sold for 700. Could somebody please tell me how you couldn't afford?
So it was. So basically,
it's just a con.
The people,
start to finish.
The people building the houses, they saw that code and they thought it's just losing us money, and we could be making even more money than the lots of money we're making in the first place.
They're making so much money. They won't admit it. You see, it's just. You don't know. You see, most architects probably don't know how much it costs to build a building. Really, the quantity surveyors tell them. We don't use quantity surveyors anymore. We just know what it costs to buy every single part. And that's the advantage of a kit of parts approach.
You talked a little bit about energy for a minute. You talked about nuclear energy and saying that you think it's a bad thing because it's putting the waste materials and that it's putting the problem somewhere else.
And the political regime that you need to stop to make a technology like that not fall into the wrong hands. You need a police state virtually to keep a technology like that from being misused.
So it's a political thing as well.
So it will affect democracy. The more toxic technologies that you introduce into the general population, it's a nuclear weapon.
So what is the solution? What do you think a good solution is to?
Well, I mean, the solution's already out there. We're talking about the UK now. Not all countries are the same. I mean, we've got excellent wind and tidal energy. They cancelled a couple of tidal power stations recently. The wind energy is becoming increasingly cost effective. Battery storage and there's not just lithium iron phosphate. There's lots of other large scale grid storage technologies coming through very, very fast. Okay. Flow batteries. So you can now store energy, or you're becoming possible to store energy in large quantities. It means the variability of renewables is less of an issue. We've got solar is now we're putting our solar cladding on at £300 a square metre, which is the same as a dun rain screen. We can easily run this country if we reduce our energy demand, which is what I've been trying to discuss, and then we go for building integrated photovoltaics, and then we go for wind farms with a contribution from tide and perhaps a bit of biomass pyrolysis, not combustion. It's all in the book. I mean, if we do all that stuff, we can do it. We can get there.
Do you think we should abandon the national grid?
No, I didn't say that. But we don't need to upgrade it.
We don't need to. We could create energy from.
If we make and store energy locally as part of architecture and master planning, the grid is important because it balances the system, but it's not so important that you need to generate all your power in one centralised location and then get it out everywhere. So one of the problems you're finding at the moment is that the UK grid can't cope with these very large power stations.
So we should spread out where the energy is being
decentralised.
Decentralise it, and so not rely so heavily on the grid.
Yeah, and that gives you a more robust society.
BedZ was a really radical and I think really ambitious project when it was first built 16 years ago. And why do you think that even now it still seems radical? Why do you think that the ideas that were thought about and the problems that it was trying to solve all this time ago, why isn't it, and a lot of those which were tackled successfully, why isn't it more the norm now?
Because nobody cares. If they wanted to adopt these ideas, they could have done. Society gets the architecture it deserves.
I think people don't care enough.
Yeah.
To. What do you think will make people care?
Well, it's the old thing, isn't it? People will only get it when they're suffering badly because something's gone wrong. I actually regard civilization as how civilized a person is or how civilized a society is by how well they can anticipate what's coming and predict and adapt. And currently, half the politicians don't believe in climate change. I gave a talk organised by Friends of the Earth the other day in a church in North London, and I was heckled by right-wing people saying that climate change isn't happening. Well, I haven't had that kind of debate for. I'm not joking. I haven't had that kind of debate for about 25 years now. So we're in a regression. We're in a reverse. So Trump world, fake news, reactionary politics.
So you think
it's getting worse?
You think it's getting worse? I want to talk a little bit about the technological things that you talk about in your book, like your Z-bike and cladding buildings in PVs. What is your Z-bike? What does that do? How is it different to your average push bike?
I cycle everywhere at the same speed as Bradley Wiggins, and I don't look like Bradley Wiggins.
It's powered by these batteries. It's battery powered, so you don't.
You have to pedal. Yeah, you have to pedal. But basically, I put about 1/3 of me, and 2/3 is electric. But I can commute 15 miles each way to work. I'm cycling 30 miles a day. I'm getting to work 10 minutes quicker than my wife, who drives an electric car. I'm going through rivers, parks, back of cemeteries, round the back of sewage works, footpaths. It's fantastic.
And so, and you just charge up these batteries?
Here, I can show you.
Oh, okay, yeah, it'd be good to see
you can
them
try it if you want.
So you charge the battery and
get here, charge it off solar.
Can you buy solar chargers? And
no, that's what we've been putting together. So basically, we're just developing this stuff at the moment. We've got what we're saying is we can take the city off grid room by room, and we run each room off one of these advanced batteries charged by the solar panels on the roof or the facades. And that's a radical, you don't have an energy bill again, or you have a very, very small one.
And how about your cars of the future, kind of powered by photovoltaics? Because there was some interesting, almost like
we just had a look
budgets.
at that. We're having a look at that now. We're really working on. We found a Chinese motorcycle manufacturer, and we're trying to persuade them to move into cars. So you sort of go in Tesla, where you need 100 kilowatt hours worth of batteries. These cars will have 6 or 8 kilowatt hours worth of these e-bike batteries, super lightweight and tilting. And it's so interesting to see. We're getting spectacular results. So if you don't go the Californian way and you think like, how do you make a car more like a motorcycle or more like a bicycle? You get a completely different answer, and it's going to be cheap, affordable, and it's sort of it's the sort of environmental version of a tuk-tuk, but with 2 wheels at front, and they tilt using their technology so that you go fast around corners and they don't fall over.
And you talk about having the streets in the sky, so potentially driving these into your homes.
Well, that's where we are. Yeah, we're basically looking at whether we can integrate. Certainly, you can put them in lifts. We're looking at how you can how that would change urban mobility. So you don't have to build a great big expensive basement and fill it with these great big lumps of tin. You just have this thing would fit in a lift, and you'd park it in your hall or on a balcony, or drive it.
That's a really interesting idea. So you're, instead of creating kind of these car parks, you could drive your car into your...
Well, these are zero emissions. They have hill climbing capability. So they basically it changes the way you think about urban mobility, because I don't know, you see lots of old people on these sort of
in the sort of
dawdling around.
Yeah.
That's kind of happening anyway, but it's happening for a target part of the market. What we're saying is we're going to make them a bit more relevant to you. In other words, they'd be fun, and we think that's a change up. So instead of saving up for whatever it is, 40 or 50,000 or 60,000 pounds to buy a Tesla, you might be up for $4,000 to buy one of those. That's what you see where I'm going.
Yeah.
In fact, for $4,500, you can buy the solar panels that didn't give you an electric bill again in its life.
And so these would you'd just be able to charge these up and not have to pay for petrol. Or
think what that's going to do to Africa, where they're bringing in, they're getting oil in Nigeria, they're taking it to UAE to turn it into petrol, then they're taking it back and distributing it on an entire continent, because there isn't an oil refinery in Africa. So imagine if you then said, well, hang on guys, why are you doing this? Why don't you just switch?
There's lots of sun to use.
Tons of sun.
And use that for your energy.
You've got shit roads, you need off-road capability. Why are you sending all this money to... I don't know where did they send it to? Saudi. I don't know. Why are you doing that? Why didn't you just do it? You've got
invest in
just move across. Just move across. Just don't engage with all this shit that we've. You don't need to fight wars over fossil fuels. If you took the cost of foreign policy of the UK to get fossil fuels going and to keep them coming in, and you put a value to that, everything I'm doing is cheap, way cheaper.
So what do you think of people who are saying that eco-architecture is expensive and not financially viable? And
where's their plan? What's their plan?
Yeah, what's that better way of doing it? You talk about having...
by the way, I'm always thrilled if there's a better way. I'm not... This isn't an ego trip for me. I'm very keen to promote. If you come up with a better way of doing any of the things we're trying to do, we'll follow you. We don't care.
You just want the best solutions to the problems that you have. And you just talk about having PV canopies over the streets.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
We think that's the next big thing. So you don't put them on buildings, you put them over roads and parking and streets, and you create these arcade type situations.
That's interesting. And so that can create energy for the city. For the city.
Yeah.
And also you talk about storing water by the streets or underneath the streets.
We've been working on that a lot. So we've come up with basically a polypropylene cellular water storage grid, and you can pour concrete into it. This is actually off the record, it's a bit secret. So you pour concrete into it, so you can basically drive a truck over the water store. So you could have a river flowing under a road, or you could have a pond. So everywhere becomes water storage.
That sounds like a radical
It's super
idea.
cheap, super cheap. What I'm saying is, if you think about something and you try and solve a problem for a long time, you do get good at it, and you do understand what the problem is, and you often can come up with ways of. You with me? You can solve problems. Like somewhere, Mexico City has massive problems with lack of water. Massive. It's totally, but it has huge torrential rain. But it just flash floods and it all goes into the rivers and into the sea. They don't store any of it. If we could just everywhere store water, that's the plan anyway. Everywhere, every single it's anywhere where you've put a concrete slab, you could be storing with water. So that's a challenge. So if you design structures that stored water, if that would change architecture. That would change how you design a city, because everywhere would be about stopping the water getting dirty and then getting it stored in a secure, cool environment, and then the thermal mass from that water is also colossal. That gives you passive cooling, gives you winter heat reservoirs. It's massive.
What do you think of the idea of the carbon trading, PCAs, personal carbon allowances, and things like that?
All good if it's genuine.
If people take it up. So this is where everyone has
carbon credits.
Yeah. And so everyone could.
It'll come. Carbon is the new currency. If climate change is going to be the biggest single factor affecting human civilization and survival, then it makes sense that carbon is the new currency, because stopping it getting out into the atmosphere is going to be an international priority.
So just
money won't actually mean anything if you can't spend it on anything.
So people who don't know anything what that is, it's basically where people have a certain amount of credits.
Yeah.
And
you get a carbon budget. Yeah.
And then when you use them up, you can't.
You've got your fair share of the right to pollute the atmosphere.
And then when you use them up, then you can't fly to the other side, to Australia.
Spot on.
Anymore.
Spot on.
Until next year when you get your new credits.
Spot on.
And okay, that will be the future potentially.
Well, what that will do is that'll give you a criteria for assessing pretty well all human endeavours. It'll give you a criteria for assessing engineering, architecture, master planning, aviation, transport, industry. It'll give you a common metric.
Wouldn't rich people just buy more?
Of course they will. But their money and their investments will be all done around understanding the implications of their actions. And that's the difference. At the moment, you can just buy your way out of any problem without understanding that you've actually just trashed a great chunk of natural capital.
And
it's harmless. It's not a new idea. This has been around a long time.
And do you think the world can run on renewables? Do you think that if everyone really tried, we don't have to burn any fuel anymore?
I guarantee it can. And anyway, we haven't got any option. Come up with an alternative plan. You know, it's all great. How could the human society ran off renewable energy for millennia? It's only relatively recently it hasn't. It's going to have to go back to it.
I think that's a good place to end.
Yeah. Come and have some lunch.
Thank you very much.